Hello? Anyway, let's go ahead and we'll open with prayer, and then we'll have a song sung, and then I'll do a little intro again. So if you bow your heads with me. Gracious Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity that we can learn more about your truths. And as the Bible comes to life with Dr. Baker sharing about the Exodus, Lord, help each one of us to know that you can lead and guide in each one of our lives. Lord, we invite your Holy Spirit here tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good evening, everyone. So happy to see each one of your smiling faces. Are we ready to sing together? All this week we've been learning about and hearing about and understanding better about the mighty power of God. So we're going to be singing hymn number 88, I Sing the Mighty Power of God. As soon as we have words, we will start singing. Let's wait for the words. All right, we're ready. I sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise, that spread the wing seas abroad and built the lofty skies. I sing the wisdom that ordained the sun to rule the day. The moon shines full at his command, and all the stars obey. There's not a plant or flower below, but makes thy glories known. And clouds arise and tempests blow by order from thy throne. Creatures that borrow life from thee are subject to thy care. There's not a place where we can flee, but God is present there. How many of you believe that? Amen. Thank you.
So I like to change it up just a little bit with the announcement. And one thing I want to announce is that it's Jason and Jennifer's anniversary today. It's their 26th. And tomorrow is my wife's birthday. And it's her 26th. Oh, I think so. Okay, well, I might have messed that up. But it is her birthday tomorrow. So congratulations, Jason and Jennifer, and congratulations, Renee. Ellis Baker Jr. is Associate Director of Andrews University Press, where he serves as the managing editor of the Andrews Study Bible, both the New King James and the New International Version, and the newly released Andrew Bible Commentary, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Dr. Baker is an Egyptian archaeologist at Karnak Temple in Egypt, and our son just went to Egypt, and it's sort of fascinating to hear all the stories you're sharing, and he's shared too. And he reads and translates hieroglyphs. He is the co-host of Inside the Bible on the Hope Channel, and he is married to Annie Lou Salzer Baker, and together they have two daughters, Ira Lee and Laura Zen, and they live in Berrien Springs, Michigan, where they are active in their local church and in Pathfinders. And I wanted to share one thing. I asked Alice if I can borrow her book, The Land of the Ramses. Did I say that right? Oh, I put it down there. I started reading it a couple nights ago, and it's almost like Dr. Baker is telling me the story like he told his kids, and it's unbelievable. But anyway, I just wanted to put a plug in for that. Again, thank you, Dr. Baker, for being here and sharing with us. God bless.
Thank you so much, and welcome to Archaeology Exodus. As you just heard, I am L.S. Baker Jr. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm having a wonderful time. I know we're getting close to the end of our week together. It gets sad. It's always sad about this time because it's like, oh, we're almost done. But we still have a few more presentations. Tonight we're going to talk about the sanctuary. And then in a few, it's not up there yet. I'm pointing up there like it's up there. and then tomorrow night we're going to talk about Mount Sinai and Jericho, touch on some of those as we talk about that difficult topic, but very important topic about the relationship of science and faith together. And then Sabbath morning, we're going to talk about specifically about the golden calf story from a spiritual standpoint. In the afternoon, we're going to come back to the Passover event and wrap up with some loose ends there as we kind of tie this whole week off. Tonight, Yahweh's Army Camp. How was the tent sanctuary constructed? This is the topic of my dissertation for my PhD, the archaeology of the sanctuary. And so I get a chance to share with you a little bit about what I learned, and it kind of brings the sanctuary back to life again. I always like to start with a quote. The first quote the quote we're gonna have tonight is words spoken by Ammon, the god Ammon, to Hatshepsut. It says, he's supposed to have said, "May you build a house, may you establish a sanctuary, and may you consecrate my godly place." It's really amazing because Ammon was the god, Amun-hotep, that's the same Ammon. Ammon was the supreme god. He was a god without form. He was formless. There's no form could describe him. And so I've often wondered, Moses, you can think about his life in the palace, at least 28 years in the palace. Hatshepsut is the queen, but she's the king, and all she needs is for him, if she really was his mother, to just adopt any god. And I can imagine Moses' struggle. I try to think about it. It wasn't a simple thing because these gods are so similar. Ptah, for example, is the creator, as the craftsman god who spoke the world into existence. Sounds an awful lot like Genesis chapter 1, which Moses wrote in Midian already, so he already knows very much about that. Ammon is the formless, supreme, all-powerful God. It'd be easy for him just to adopt one of these gods as if that was the God of heaven, and then he can become king, and as soon as he becomes king, he can let all of his people go. So the temptations for him were quite strong. Well, Hatshepsut had a mortuary temple just outside the Valley of the Kings, and that's what this is talking about. She established a sanctuary for the god Ammon just outside the Valley of the Kings, and if indeed she was his mother, and he kills the Egyptian and flees, and a short time after she dies, that mortuary temple was built during her reign, and Moses would certainly have stood on those steps. So if you get a chance to visit Egypt and you get to go to that mortuary temple, the sanctuary of Ammon, you get a chance to stand where almost certainly Moses would have stood. We talked the first time together about the chronology of Egypt. When were the Hebrews in Egypt? We determined that it was the New Kingdom. We have three theories. You're very familiar with this by now. Looking at the 18th dynasty for these two here, and the 19th dynasty for when they left Egypt, early date and late date. We have the location where they were living at the time of the Exodus. No matter which early date or late date, it's going to be right here for the city of Ramses and here for the city of Pithom. And their land of Goshen, land of Ramses would have been in between that at the time of the Exodus. We talked about who the pharaoh might have been. There's three candidates. Ramses is the main choice by the majority of scholars because the name Ramesses appears in the text as a city and a land. Thutmose is a lot of conservative scholars, including a lot of Adventist scholars, choose Thutmose because he died very close to the Exodus date, and so they'll push the Exodus date back to match up with him, so he could have died in the Red Sea. Amenhotep is my selection for a lot of reasons. He fits the chronology, he fits the content. Probably could not have died in the Dead Sea, most likely. He's the only candidate who himself was not a firstborn and also did not have also had a firstborn son who also died young. So I think it's Amenhotep, but there's also those other options by very, very good scholars. Then we talked about the 10 plagues and why there were 10 plagues. A God who can send 10 one at a time, certainly can send them all at once. Why would he do them at all? And we discovered that it was to redeem the Hebrews and to redeem the Egyptians. And so we saw a great multitude leave with the Hebrews out of Egypt. And so last night we talked about 5 theories about the location of the Red Sea crossing, the two northern theories, the Mediterranean Northern Lake theory, the Sea of Reeds theory and the Bitter Lakes, the northern tip of the Gulf of Suez, and around Nuweiba in the Gulf of Aqaba. Those are the 5 theories. I settled on this one, Gulf of Suez, as I think it fits the chronology, the timing of the route, of 10 miles a day travel, and the supplies as well. And so I think that's where it was located. But again, good scholars, very good scholars on the others as well, so it could have been one of the others. So tonight we're going to skip all the way ahead to that. They're at Mount Sinai itself, and now they're going to build this wilderness tent sanctuary for God. I'm going to use certain terms as I talk, and I want to make sure that we all know what we're talking about. We're all saying the same thing. When I say sanctuary, I'm referring to everything. I'm referring to the entire sacred space from the courtyard all the way in. When I say tabernacle, I'm just referring to the central structure that has the holy and the most holy place. Holy place is that initial area as you walk into the tabernacle, and the most holy place is the space behind or inside of the veil. And so we'll talk about those terms in that way. This is what I'm talking about. So when I say sanctuary, I mean everything inside of the perimeter is sanctuary. And when I talk about the tabernacle, I'm talking about this right here, the holy place and the most holy place. So we're going to use this kind of a diagram now from a top-down bird's eye view. Here's the gate at the bottom. Here's the bronze altar, the laver. I'm putting them in order, in line, even though the biblical text does not necessarily have them in line. It's quite possible this could have been to the side. We don't know, but I put it there because it's typically put there in traditional. Get inside the tabernacle into the holy place, the table on the right, the lampstand on the left, the gold altar before you, gold altar of incense, and then the veil, the holy place, the most holy place inside, and the Ark of the Covenant inside of that. So just so you kind of can read where we're going, I'm going to go piece by piece. Courtyard perimeter barrier is the outside one here. The tabernacle obviously here, then all the furnishings, all the different pieces of furniture. All right, so looking at Exodus 25, 8 and 9, Moses is up on the mountain, and God is speaking to him, and God says, let them make me a sanctuary, it means a sacred space, that I may dwell among them according to all that I show you. That is the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of the furnishings, just so you shall make it. And so we see here, when I was doing my dissertation, they call it a dissertation, it's actually a thesis, an MA thesis in England. I did it on this same topic, and I was suggesting a sacred space and a domestic space to dwell. Royal domestic. I actually didn't think about the domestic space. I thought about the sanctuary element, and then one of my professors said, but it also says dwell, so shouldn't you include domestic space as well, and specifically royal domestic? And I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I started looking at all of the sacred spaces in Egypt and all the sacred spaces, the royal domestic spaces also in Egypt. Because my thesis was, the Bible says they came out of Egypt. They didn't encounter any other cultures except for the Amalekites who they fought before they got to Mount Sinai, wherever that's out, and they built the sanctuary there. Is it possible that Egyptian cultural influence could have had any bearing on the sanctuary itself? In other words, were any design elements from Egypt that could have been used here, or was it's just a brand new, unique? I've always thought of it as unique, as something brand new that I had never heard of before. But I had seen certain things in my studies to suggest that maybe it wasn't. Maybe there was that God may have used something from Egypt in this, and so I wanted to see if you could measure that in some way. I also wanted to see about the materials. Is it possible the materials could have been there as well? And so I saw a sacred space and a royal domestic space. And then if you look at Exodus 12, there's 3 verses, 17, 41, and 51, that say these things. It says, so you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Then in verse 41, it came to pass that all the armies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. And in verse 51, and it came to pass on the very same day, that the Lord brought the armies of Israel out of the land of Egypt, the very same day as the feast of unleavened bread. So when it says on the same day, it's talking about the feast of unleavened bread. That very same day that it began, they came out by their armies. And then you go down to Numbers 2 to 3, it says, every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard. I'll show you what a standard looks like in a second. beside the emblems of his father's house. We'll talk about this here in a second. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting. That's the tabernacle in the center. On the east side toward the rising of the sun, those are the standard of the forces of Judah. And it goes on to explain each of the tribes. And each of them says, according to their armies. Well, that's a weird thing to call a bunch of slaves. Call them by their armies. What does that mean? And so there seems to be a military context also for the sanctuary. And so I wanted to measure this three things: the sacred space, the domestic space, and the military space. By the way, here's a military standard from Egypt. This is what they had. They were on long poles. This poles are short here because it's just for decoration, but it's on long poles, and they would have it the same kind of crossbar. This happens to be Wajet. You see the winged cobra. We talked about her quite a few times, and she's on a standard. Well, each of the tribes was camped according to their armies. Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun were on the east, with Judah leading, followed by Reuben, Simeon, and Gad on the south, followed by Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin on the west, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali on the north. And this is the way they would march. And then the Levites were camped in between, kind of like a buffer between the sanctuary and the armies, the camps of Israel. Moses and Aaron were camped on the east before the gate to the courtyard perimeter. The Kohathites, responsible for the furnishings, moving the furnishings on the south, the Gergesites, and then the Merarites on the west and the north. And so they kind of came out in a certain way, so that as they left camp, the sanctuary went with them. As they arrived in camp, it was built in a way so that when the Kohathites brought in the furnishings, everything was already set up. And so it was a mobile site. And so I have these two sanctuary dwelling armies, sacred space, royal, domestic, and military. So those are the things I'm looking at as I went through this. And then I noticed in Exodus 25, 1-5, God says to Moses that every children of Israel speak to them that they may bring me an offering, give it willingly from his heart, specifically these metals, gold, silver, and bronze, and then some textiles, blue, purple, and scarlet thread, fine linen, goat's hair, and then some leathers, ram skins dyed red, and then this strange tahas skins, and then acacia wood. So those are the 9 materials. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look through each of these. I have them on the screen. We're going to evaluate, is it possible? And as we evaluate them, we'll also talk about how they were used. And so we're going to talk about each of these metals for one at a time, trying to discover, is there Egyptian influence? Were all these materials available when they left? Because if they weren't all available, then we have a problem. Were they all available at the time of the Exodus in Egypt? And what can we learn about that? And then, were Egyptian designs used, or was it a brand new thing? And so let's start off with the design first. Go to Egyptian military camp. So one of the most fascinating things, you probably have heard about this, but the temple of Abu Simbel, when they built the Aswan High Dam, it was going to flood. They're trying to back up and make a lake, and it would be called Lake Nasser. Well, in doing that, you're going to also flood a number of monuments, including this beautiful monument at Abu Simbel. And so what they did, I think PBS did a big special on this. UNESCO got together and they actually fascinating how they cut this temple into blocks, and they moved it uphill, up a little bit higher up elevation, so when the water came up, it wouldn't be buried underwater. They put it back exactly as it was. And so when you visit today, I was just there a few months ago, you walk in these massive colossi, statues of Ramses the Great, the second Ramses, sitting down on either side. You walk inside, and there's a nice little column of more statues of Ramses standing up, and then inside here is another shrine, and inside here is the final shrine altogether. It goes all the way back, and so back in here are statues, 4 statues. One is Ramses himself, and what actually happens is on the solstices, the sun will go right through this doorway right here and go all the way back and shine. I'll go from shine all the way back to the sanctuary back here, and only the god Seth, the evil god, the hippopotamus god Seth. I'm sorry, but he's evil. But that's in Egyptian mythology he is. And then back here, he's the only one that doesn't get light on him. Everyone else has light shining on him. Anyway, as you go inside, why I'm mentioning it to you right now is you go inside and you turn right, and you come right over here is the battle that Ramses had with the Hittites. And this is the battle he had before the peace treaty that I'm working on. And on this, you can't see it right now, but if you kind of can look at this huge battle scene, you see him standing, he's sitting here, he's ruling. This whole story tells about how they camped, and they set their camp. The camp is right here. As they set their camp up, Ramses led out, and the Hittites attacked their camp, and Ramses, single-handedly did his thing and pushed them back until the other armies got there, and they won the day. If they won the day, then I wonder why they had a peace treaty. So that's something to put in your mind. But anyway, they may not have actually won it so much. Here's a line drawing of what it looks like. This is the total camp. You see the shields, the little shields all the way here, kind of forming a perimeter to the camp itself. And then inside the camp are certain tents. See certain tents here. Horses are lined up over here. Here's the Hittites attacking on this side, and Ramses is right there, nicely located. It's actually illustrated in 3 different places: Abu Simbel, also the Ramesseum, which is close to Hatshepsut's mortuary temple near the Valley of the Kings, and then also the Luxor temple, just south of Karnak, where I'm at. And what's really interesting, I don't expect you to see this, but what I'm interested in is that each time the same thing. So the horses are always lined up here. Every time it's a gray circle. There's always a man carrying buckets of water between 2 tents. Same 2 tents here. Same thing here. There's always the horse reared up, the Hittites coming in, attacking. It's always in the same place. These are all the same things. Even right here, you probably can't see it, a lion and a lion tamer. It's actually titled in hieroglyphs. Ramses had a pet lion in the camp, and it's always right in the same place. So it seems like this is portraying an actual moment when the camp was attacked. And so as I look at this, to see if I could, I noticed this right here, and I'm not the first one. I think Kenneth Kitchen may have noticed it first, and then Randy Yonker, my professor, lead professor at Institute of Archaeology at Andrews, he pointed it out to me when we visited it, and it looks like there's a structure here, and then inside that structure, there's a longer, bigger room with 5 people worshiping towards a smaller room. And I don't know if you can notice this, but there's a box here. It's like it's a chest, an ark of some kind, and it has winged creatures facing each other, and the name of the god King Ramses in between them. And so that strangely looks like a lot like the sanctuary, if you kind of note in the Ark of the Covenant. It's kind of weird how uncanny it is. Here it is in color. You can see that in color now. There's the lion over there, and here's the horses, and you see the battle happening. But here's this box shape. It looks a whole lot like you could imagine the Ark of the Covenant might look. It's really strange looking. So what is that about that? Well, in looking at Assyrian camps are not rectangular. Assyrian camps are round. So here is Sargon's camp, battle camp. Here's Sennacherib. Here's another one from Sennacherib. Here's Ashurbanipal. So from different time periods, and you have different things happening in this camp, and it's always round, circular, not rectangular. The king's tent always looks like this with a little canopy. Here's somebody poking up out of it over here. There's always different things. Here's other kind of tents here as well. It's a different kind of structure. It doesn't look the same as the very rectangular kind of structure that Egyptian camps had. And so that made me start thinking about the tent sanctuary. I was like, okay, so it doesn't seem to have a Mesopotamian influence. It seems to have an Egyptian, at least the very superficial structure. It's a rectangle and not a circle. And so we're going to start looking at this one piece by piece. The courtyard perimeter barrier. It was 5 cubits high, which is about 8.5 feet high. So this barrier of linen cloth is about a 5 cube, which is about 8.5 feet high. I don't think I can reach 8.5 feet high. So in other words, you couldn't see over it inside of it. If you're outside, the linen is taller than you, and you wouldn't be able to see inside. The tabernacle itself was 10 cubits high, which means it's about 17 feet. And so while you couldn't see over the barrier, you would be able to see the top part of the tabernacle from outside. So just kind of giving you an idea of what you see. Focusing on the gate here, the gate is on this side in our schematic, and it was embroidered with blue, purple, and red embroidery. So here's the courtyard barrier there, about 8.5 feet tall. Linen is one of the materials asked for. Well, linen is very popular in ancient Egypt. It was made out of flax. We mentioned that with the hail of plagues. The plague of hail a few nights ago. Linen was the first covering layer of the tabernacle. It also was the courtyard perimeter and gate. Linen, of course, was made very much in Egypt. In fact, depending on what part of the flax plant you used, it could be more white or less white, but they would actually bleach this to make it as white as possible. But the really thin, almost transparent linen, This is the very, very best part, the core part of the flax plant, and they would do this. Actually, the Hebrew word shesh that's used to describe linen is an Egyptian loan word. This is one thing I really, really liked. You see this box up here on the left? That box is how they stored linen. So if you were very, very rich, you would store your spare clothing in a box just like this. And here's the thing. The way you illustrate that you were rich is that your clothes had wrinkles in them. So when I first got married, I was an island boy. I've been a missionary. I don't know what an iron really was. And my wife said, if you want to go on dates with me, you're going to have to iron your clothes. And so she straightened me up and made me look like I do, which is much better than I used to look. But I said to her, when I found this out, I said, sweetheart, look, if I have wrinkles on my clothes, it just means we're rich. And she says, no, we're not in Egypt. Okay. So linen definitely was there in Egypt. Also said that the gate was embroidered with blue, purple, and scarlet thread. Interestingly, thread was not dyed before it was woven until the New Kingdom. Because flax is very cellulose, it doesn't hold the dye very well. And so what they would do is they would actually weave the entire cloth and then dye the cloth. But in the early 18th dynasty, early New Kingdom, they discovered a technique for being able to dye individual threads before they wove, and that's how they were able to dye threads. So the idea that there was thread that was dyed is new technology for that time period. In fact, red dye, the scarlet here, red dye was introduced for the first time in clothing in the early 18th dynasty. There wasn't even red dye before that for clothing. So this is brand new technology, and because you had red, you could then get purple. You first would dye the thread red. They're using minerals, earth minerals and things to make this dye, and so for whatever reason, the red had to go first. Then they dipped it into the blue until they got the desired color of purple of the thread that they wanted, and that's how they did it. So they dyed the thread. One thing I noticed, as you're looking at Tutankhamun's jewelry right here, one thing I noticed in looking at jewelry and things that colors associated with the royalty, with the king, is that there's only 3 colors. You might see a green color here, but the green color actually is just the blue that's faded and become green. It's actually just 3 colors. So there's the blue turquoise, which represented divinity. This is the light blue color here. You see, that was divinity. The purple, which is actually a dark blue color here. That's lapis lazuli. It's actually represented royalty. And then red, the red you see here, it's carnelian. Or red jasper. This represented supernatural power. Remember I told you that they painted their doors red? They did that on purpose because the color red would keep out the supernatural forces they believed. And so the king, being a god, was blue, divine, but he also was very dangerous. Red was the color of danger, and so very dangerous, supernatural danger, and the mixed together made him king, and so that's why the king had those 3 colors. So what I'm saying is when the Hebrews would have walked up to the courtyard and they would have seen those 3 colors, they knew that on the other side of that gate was their king. Also, embroidery was reserved just for royalty. So in the early 18th dynasty, I think also the 19th, I think throughout the entire New Kingdom, no common person, no nobility could have embroidery, just the king. And so when just having embroidery by itself, or whatever the design was, as you go to the courtyard, the gate, you knew that was your king just because of the fact that there was embroidery there. This, what you're looking at, when it was found, was the oldest embroidered cloth that existed. This actually is the second Amenhotep, Keper Ure. That's Amenhotep II. That's who I think the Pharaoh of the Exodus is. We happen to have a cloth embroidered with his name on it. Now it's not the oldest cloth that has been found, but at the time it was. It's very interesting. So I like that a lot. The way they made cloth is they made it by twisting the flax until they made the thread, and then they would weave it. And for the most of the history of Egypt to this point, they did it on a ground loom. But the Hyksos brought in with them these gigantic 5-meter tall vertical looms. And so in the New Kingdom, they had the ability to make very, very, very long cloths because of vertical looms. And so this also new technology. This courtyard perimeter is very, very long. A lot of the strips of cloth are very, very long, and they did those on vertical looms, gigantic vertical looms. So it seems like, because they wove these at the foot of Mount Sinai. Book of Exodus says they wove them there at Sinai. And so it seems like the ladies who were working on these big looms back in Egypt, when it was time to go, they said, I think I'll take that with me and start my business over there. Why make a new one? I'll take it along with me. And so when I got to Sinai, they said, okay, we'll set these up and use them for God, and made their linens for God there at Sinai. And so I think they took those things with them. Okay, so there's that. So we have the courtyard, and we have the gate. And now we're going to go to the tabernacle. That's up set apart there. So if I'm looking at this Egyptian military camp, I'm considering, if you can see, the blue line to be the courtyard perimeter, and then this green box here to be something similar to in design. It's the same dimensions, although the courtyard is much, much bigger in the Hebrew 10th century than this central structure is here. But you can see it over and over again. There's this green one here on the inside. That green one on the inside, I think I'm going to call that the tabernacle, a central structure, because that's what it was. That's what it was here. Abu Simbel version, the Ramessean version, you see it here. They also have a couple more tents inside. I think those are for officials, the princes. Here it is again here, the green inside here with the two other elements. So if we're looking at this, the same dimensions actually line up. I won't bore you with the statistics, but it does line up. But so this tabernacle was made with on 3 sides with frames. It says 20 boards on the north, 20 boards on the south, 8 boards on the west. And these boards were held together. There was 4 rings, 5 poles, 2 there, and then 1 that goes through the middle, all the way through the middle. So I think if you think about these poles, these boards, you put a pole through the middle, they're going to shift like this, right? So those other poles are stabilizing poles that keep it together. It allows you to put it together quickly and take it apart quickly with no nails. And the base of each of these, I don't know if you can see that, each of these boards had 2 sockets. A socket was buried for weight. So I'm sure everybody in here knows what the game tetherball is. You remember tetherball? I tell it to my kids, they have no idea what a tetherball is. I mean, how they're robbed of the joy of smacking a ball as hard as you can and try to dodge it and keep it going and wrap around a pole. Anyway, you know how those metal poles were anchored in the ground by cement, usually a cylinder of cement, right? That cylinder of cement is a socket. Okay, so that socket was buried for weight, and so they could keep it drilled in the ground with this silver sockets, and the boards were put on top, and then they were connected with these poles and then these rings. By the way, rings in construction in ancient Egypt were not rings like the rings you have on your finger. They're more like a Pringles can. It's more like a cylinder. And so you see them kind of drawn here like cylinders. It's for poles to go into so they stabilize. If it's a ring, that pole will move. But if it's a cylinder, then it can't move as easily. It's more stable. So that's what they were using. That's how they did it. They connected them together. 30 feet, let's see, what do we have? 51 feet in length. I think 51 feet by about 20 feet by about 17 feet tall. And these were made of acacia wood. So acacia wood is all over Egypt. There's actually quite a few varieties. Sinai also has acacia wood. But the acacia wood has to be, let me see over here. Acacia wood has to be about 15 feet, about 10 cubits tall. So we're looking at about 10 cubits in height, about 15 feet. Well, acacia wood, there's only one type of acacia. This is a smaller one, but they grow really, really tall in Egypt, and it's called Acacia nilotica. Nile nilotica, it grows along the Nile. And this one grew very, very long, and you were able to get up to 12 cubits in length boards, so much longer than was needed for the sanctuary. And so actually we have probably very, very long poles. You can actually cut them down to size and make these boards. They use Acacia nilotica to make ships, siding for ships. They also use it in construction and other things. Whenever they needed long, long boards, they would use Acacia nilotica. And because this grows in Egypt and not the Sinai, it's probably they brought these boards with them. My thinking is, and some people disagree with this, but I think and I know if I was working and building a city and I was using maybe mud bricks and wood, and I cut all that wood, why would I just leave it in Egypt if I had carts and I could take the wood with me? Why go all the way over to the promised land and cut more wood if I already cut wood? I'm taking the wood with me. So I think they had this wood with them when they got to Sinai, and they basically gave pieces of their house, their future house, to God for the service of the sanctuary. This is what I think they were doing. So of course that is in Egypt. And then we get back here to the curtain or the canopy. the temple veil. I've actually put a cube here. I've always thought of the veil as a single curtain, but actually the word used here could be interpreted either way. And in Exodus, I don't know if you can see this, Exodus 41:21 and Numbers 4:5, it says the ark was to be inside and under. The Hebrew word is under the veil. And so I didn't know what that meant. And so I was wait, what could it possibly be? A cube. I had never thought of it that way. It had four poles holding it up. And I always thought of those as four poles in a line. And it still could be that way. It's possible. It doesn't talk about ropes holding it, and there's no real way to fasten it to keep it from leaning forward or back, but maybe it could be put in the ground enough to keep it from falling. I don't know. But because the veil is said to be the ark is said to be under the veil, and because in Egypt they often use canopies for sacred spaces, and because I had professors, Dr. Davidson, Dr. Gain at the seminary in Andrews, who said that the most holy place, a 10 by 10 by 10 holy place, a cube holy place, had a lot of symbolism. They were really charmed by the fact that maybe this could actually be a cube. No dimensions are given actually in the Bible. But here's how veils look like in Egypt. You saw the one over the shrine for Tutankhamun. There's also ones here. You see them here. You see this one kind of for a bed chamber. This is an Old Kingdom example. So you kind of can see this is quite something that happened quite a lot. And so as I thought about this, I said, well, actually, when it says that they sprinkled the blood on the veil, you could still do that whether it's a curtain or whether it's a canopy. Either one of those could be the same thing. You still could go inside. The smoke could still go up over. And so I think it possibly could be a cube. I'm not a canopy. I'm not 100% sold on that, but I'm just going to give it to you. Anyway, we don't know how big the most holy place was, so I'm going to go ahead and put that there, and then you can decide for yourself if you think that's right or not. I'm not sure. Then it says the screen. There should be a screen. The screen is in the front. The screen, we also don't have dimensions for the screen, but the screen was also embroidered. I just put cherubim on it with wings. I didn't know what else to put on there. Embroidered it I drew these pictures, by the way. And then I noticed that there's, in ancient Egypt, there's always these poles going up in front of every temple. Every temple in Egypt had these poles going up. These are flag poles. So at Karnak, they have the same thing, places for flag poles. This is an old one. This is one of the earliest known temples in ancient Egypt. It has posts holes in the ground for posts that go up for flags. In fact, the hieroglyph for a god is actually a flag pole with a flag on it, and it represents a god. And so this is very important in ancient Egypt. So I thought, is it possible it could have had this? I kind of think phenomenologically. If you have inside of here, you have a lampstand burning oil, you can have smoke. If you have a golden altar of incense in there, also burning with smoke, then that smoke has to go someplace. So if it's locked in there, how is the smoke getting out? But if they had 5 poles. If the Bible says there's 5 poles, it doesn't say how they're arranged. I just put them in order, 5 in order. If they extended up higher, there would have been a little gap. They didn't have to extend higher. They could have stopped there as well, but there still could have been a gap. Maybe the smoke could have come out. That's just artistic license. You don't have to believe that part. Okay, then we'll go over here for the linen veil. So the first linen covering layer, there's 4 covering layers. The first one was linen. It also was embroidered, and it was in 10 strips. 5 strips sewn together, 5 other strips sewn together, and then the 2 were fastened together with gold clasps and things. So they're kind of fastened together. So if you're inside the tabernacle and you look up, you're going to see a linen ceiling with embroidery, but you're going to still have those golden acacia wood overlaid with gold walls of the frame. So you're going to have the gold on both sides and a linen in front of you. You have the linen screen behind you and the linen veil in front of you, whether it's a curtain or whether it's a canopy. Either one, you're still going to see that in front of you. Sets of 5. So that's what it would look, something like that. And then you put the screen on it, so it looks something like that. Then it had another layer on it. That next layer was of goat's hair. Goat's hair was covered. It also had the same strips. It actually had an extra one here in the front. There was only half that kind of fell over the front. But it was also connected by bronze clasps. And it would have hung 1 meter below the, let me go back 1 cubit below the linen cubits on both sides. It actually would have covered, you couldn't have seen the linen because the goat's hair kind of covered it up. So if I put these overlaid each other, the strips of linen are in blue, the strips of goat's hair are in brown, and you can see that the lines never ever match up. So it would have been somewhat watertight. Goat's hair is all everywhere. Bedouin tents, goat's hair that's how they made tents, Bedouin tents. Still make them that way today. If you go up to Andrews University, you go to the Institute of Archaeology, you go to a museum, you'll find a Bedouin tent made of goat's hair. What's nice about goat's hair is when it gets wet, it kind of swells and it kind of holds the water, so they actually like that a lot. So goat's hair is something, it's very durable. And so what I think I saw here is that the linen layer is that valuable thin kind of layer here, very beautiful, valuable, and then the utilitarian strength layer is this goat's hair over top of it, kind of protecting it. Here's an example of goat's hair. This is Ptolemaic, so it's late. This is what goat's hair looks like. But they had goat's hair, of course, every time in Egypt. And that would have covered over a little bit, hung down a bit, but not quite to the ground. We don't know if they kind of pulled away. Sometimes you see the sanctuary kind of pulled away. It's possible, but it doesn't say that in the text. So I was just going off of what the text said. Okay, and that's what it looked like so far. We're kind of building it here. The next layer was ram skins dyed red. Here's, I told you last night, I was going to show you a chariot cover, a leather chariot cover. This is it right here. Chariot cover dyed red. Interestingly about the red is that the red dye was the best dye for leather. You could dye it green, blue. I've seen brown. I think I've seen yellow, but did I say blue already? Those were more like paints, and so they sat on the top of the leather, and then over time they cracked and became fragile, like kind of brittle and kind of fell apart. But the red dye, for whatever reason, it would sink into the leather and fuse with the leather, so it became a superior color for dye. And because of the symbolism of the color, Egyptians adopted that, and so I actually made this in the cubes because ancient Egyptian tents were like this. In fact, I don't know if I show you a picture of one here. Maybe not yet. Maybe I'll show you one in a minute. But anyway, it would have covered. I put it all the way covered to the ground, but we don't have any dimensions, so we don't know how far it went down. But this is a ram skins dyed red. I don't know how long. If it had gone to the ground or not, I don't know. And then the one on top of that, the outermost. There's 4 layers. The outermost layer is this mysterious tahas. The word in Hebrew is tahas, and you don't know what that means exactly. So we looked all over. Sometimes you read in the Bible, it could say badger. I think the King James says badger. I think the New King James says dolphin or something like that. One of them says porpoise. One says dunung. I guess like a manatee. There's others have a goat's hair again. Sometimes they say beadwork. There's been a lot of debate over the source animal. Well, I went to Egypt and I saw this word. Benjamin Noonan did a lot of work on this, and he suggests that this tahas layer actually is from an Egyptian word that's used not for the source animal, but for the preparation and the treatment of the leather. So when you have a leather, it could be a cow leather, or it could be a goat or a sheep leather, and you stretch it out and you cure it. You kind of stretch it across something, kind of stretch it, and you pound on it and do everything you do to make it soft and fine, soft leather. It's the kind of leather they used for drums. It's the kind of leather they used for the Book of the Dead. It's very, very nice parchment, very expensive leather. And so I think that's what this tahas, this is the same word in Egypt, tahas. It's the same word. I think it means a fine leather. Here's what I was going to show you. This is what Egyptian tent looks like, made out of leather. It's like almost like a circus tent or a checkers board. So I didn't want to do that for the sanctuary, but at least I went ahead and put them in squares. But they're all, it looks kind of silly. But this is how, I guess in ancient Egypt they didn't have checkerboards, so they thought this was like a really cool pattern. But anyway, as I thought about these layers, I thought this is God's doing something very, 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 very special with this tabernacle. The outermost layer, the part you can see from outside of the sanctuary, over the top of the courtyard perimeter barrier, you see the tabernacle at the top of it. You see this very fine, very expensive premium leather, and so that tells you right away. You see how big it is. You see how much, 51 feet of it. You see it's quite big. That much of it is all for God's tabernacle. If you're a priest and you go inside the tabernacle, you look up, you see the linen. It's very expensive linen. So you see the 2 most valuable layers on the outside, either from the outside or from the inside, and then the 2 utilitarian layers, the goat's hair and the ram skins dyed red, are kind of holding the weight of everything in between. So there's 4 layers. I don't know what other reason they had those. That's my understanding of why they had those layers. And then, of course, the linen in front. And now let's go to the furnishings as we're trying to get through time. The bronze altar was first. The bronze altar was 5 cubits wide, 3 cubits high, 5 feet. So it's about 8.5 feet, 8.5 feet wide. I don't know, I'm 6 feet tall. I don't know if you kind of think how big this is. And about 5 feet high, so it's going to be about this high. That's the bronze altar of sacrifice that they burnt offering. It's going to be really, really big. It's out in the courtyard, right about there. And there's a lot of different altars in ancient Egypt. This is one in Karnak. They used altars. They had horns. The horns looked just like this. They had stairways to go up onto it because on this particular one, we had to get up to the top of it. But this didn't have stairs, of course, didn't need them. But it was very mobile, but it was large. Wood overlaid with bronze. It had pans. It had a grate about halfway down. So the burnt offerings went inside about halfway down inside. And then the ashes fell out the bottom of it. It had rings here for the poles about midway down, and those were also overlaid. Well, bronze was common in Egypt. Here's an example of a copper ingot. Remember I showed you Amenhotep II shot some arrows through a copper ingot? That's what he shot it through. He says. I don't know if I believe him, but that's what he says. And then here's a curling iron. So ladies, if you wanted to curl your hair, that's what they used in the New Kingdom to pinch their hair and to twist it. And also some trimmers. It's tongs and trimmers. I'm not sure how all that works, but they used that to kind of curl their hair, and then they trimmed it in some way. And those are made of bronze. So lots of parts were made of bronze, mostly all in the courtyard. Sometimes it's translated copper. They did have copper, but copper was earlier in Egypt. The New Kingdom for the first time had bronze. It's a brand new material. Notice the different color of copper versus bronze. It's kind of a darker, more rich-looking color. Brass, which is here in the middle, didn't appear until the Ptolemaic period, so it could not have been brass. So we had copper as early as the early dynastic period. Bronze comes in now, so it's really a new technology. Here's a cat, a bronze cat. Here's a bronze mirror. If you want to look at yourself in a mirror, they didn't use glass. They used polished metal, and you had to kind of see yourself in your image as best you could. That's the best that they had. These are some bronze knives used for mummification. Bronze was better than copper because you could sharpen it, make it sharper than copper. Also, you could use a lower melting temperature as you fastened whatever you were going to fashion out of it. So it actually made it better for working. So bronze was a superior metal. The laver, we have no idea what the laver looked like. Usually it's round. It also has a base to it that we usually don't talk about, but we usually make it round. In Egypt, these were actually rectangular purification pools. The priests also went and they washed themselves to purify themselves before they went inside the temple. This pool back here, this is Karnak Temple, by the way. This one back here, it's also here. That's likely where the hippopotami ritual took place. That's a hippopotamus pool. So if you're wondering where that took place, that abomination of a hippopotamus ritual took place right there. But anyway, they also had purification, but it was also square. So we make it round, but there's no dimensions in the Bible, so we don't really know what dimensions it looked like. So I'm going to put that there. And then the table on the inside, on the north side, we have an idea what the table looked like because although it was Herod's temple, when the Arch of Titus, when Titus came and he destroyed the temple, the temple of Jerusalem, Herod's temple, they took out the menorah and the table of showbread with the 2 silver trumpets, and it kind of shows where they stored, at least at the time of Jesus, where they stored the 2 silver trumpets. We have no idea if that's how it looked at the time of Moses. It's obviously much later. This is also after the Babylonian captivity, so a lot of things could have changed, but at least that's how it looked at the time. Something like this. This is an Egyptian kind of style with how Egyptians did it, with a little table on top for the showbread. And the pictures of gold, everything is gold. This is gold, wood overlaid with gold. And again, rings with cylinders, not rings like this. So you've seen gold quite a lot. Bronze was out in the courtyard. In the tabernacle itself was just gold. This is what a gold nugget looks like. Egypt was the source of gold at the time, throughout almost all the ancient Near East, throughout almost all the periods. This is Tutankhamun's mask. You see the gold that's used here. Gold was used everywhere. It was actually monopolized by the royalty because of its connection. Here's some gold slippers here. The Papyrus Harris says that there was an enormous amount of gold in Egypt. In fact, it describes at the Temple of Karnak 2 solid gold obelisks. These are these tall towers with like a pyramid on top. 2 solid gold obelisks, each weighing 38 tons. Each of them 38 tons, which is about $1,500,000,000 in today's money. That's just one obelisk. Egypt had tons of gold. The Hebrews only gave they gave a lot of gold. They gave 1 ton of gold to the building of the sanctuary, the whole sanctuary and tabernacle itself. So they gave a lot of gold, but they probably had a whole lot more gold with them. Egypt had tons of gold, and when they came out with quite a lot. It was used for a lot of things. Now, in the Bible, it says pure gold. And so I thought of pure gold as refined gold, because that's what I think of as pure, no imperfections. But what I discovered was pure gold it says Exodus 25:11 didn't actually exist in ancient Egypt until they didn't actually refine gold until the late period, because it cost too much in processing to do that. And also, pure gold is kind of malleable, so it doesn't hold its shape. So actually, it's better to have some imperfections in it. Actually, gold, as you drew it from the ground, was actually electrum. It's actually electrum. In fact, the Amarna tablets, this is at the time of Akhenaten, the heretic king, 4 kings after, three kings after the Exodus, I think the Exodus. Could be 4 kings after if Tutmos was the pharaoh. They complained because when Pharaoh Akhenaten gave them gold, he gave them electrum. They called it pale gold. It's gold mixed with silver. And they said, why do you give us this bad gold? Why don't you give us, the good stuff? So what the Egyptians would do to make it good, you see over here, it's not pale at all. What they would do is they would mix copper with the electrum to give it that kind of ruddy look, to make it look more like gold should look. And so they would do that. And so that they say, why did you give us the gold before you added to it and make it look good? So this is what gold electrum looked like in the time of Egypt. Of course, silver was also there. Silver was very, very plentiful. At one point, silver was more plentiful in Egypt than gold. It was more rare than gold, so it was more valuable than gold. By the time of the New Kingdom, it was actually more plentiful. Silver actually was considered to be the bones of the gods. Here you see a silver libation vessel from the 3rd Tutmos, also a candidate for Pharaoh of the Exodus. So you see what silver was used like. So tons of silver. Most of the silver was in those sockets that was buried in the ground for weight for the tabernacle. So the vast majority of the silver was used as weights in the ground. Imagine how valuable this tabernacle is. I learned over the course of studying this that the sanctuary was a very, very valuable space. I didn't have any idea how valuable it was. So silver obviously was used in many places. Here's a casket from the 2nd Shishak, not the one from the Bible, but the one after. And it's a silver coffin. It's so much silver. In fact, so much too far. They said in Numbers 2:23, Numbers 2 and 3, make 2 silver trumpets. These silver trumpets would be used to be blown to call them to worship, to mobilize them for moving and for doing different things, directing the camp's movements, the signal activity. We actually found silver trumpets in Tutankhamun's tomb, and they played it. You actually can go to YouTube and listen to this. It has a kind of a note close to the C major when it's played. Unfortunately, though, that when you hear the sound, and if you go to YouTube and listen to it, you'll hear the sound it makes. A professional trumpeter is doing it, but he ended up breaking the trumpet. I guess it's too old, it was too fragile, and so that trumpet got damaged in doing it. But you still can hear what it sounded like. Here are the silver trumpets here. It seems to be associated with the table of showbread. And so across the room was the lampstand. I'll go over here. The lampstand, I have to move around or I get bored. So I'll go over here. Lampstand. So the lampstand actually was seven poles, all came together in one. You're probably very familiar with that. Here's etchings on walls later on. Here's the one from the Arch of Titus. But then the lamps themselves, the lamps sat on top. So the lamps were not the lampstand. The lamps are separate from the lampstands, probably also made of gold. And so when you read in Revelation 1 that Jesus is standing in the midst of lampstands, those lampstands' job is to hold up the light of the lamp, right? So they're holding up the lamp. If you think about the virgins, the 10 virgins in Matthew 25, they were supposed to hold the lamps, they were mobile lamp stands. Where the wedding party went, they would bring the light with them. So what God is calling his people in Revelation 1 to be is mobile lamp stands. We are the light of the world as long as we're holding up the light, which is Jesus. If you lift up Jesus, you are a lamp stand, and you're supposed to be giving the gospel commission to the world. You hold it up on a lamp stand because it gives a brighter, like a bigger footprint of light, right? That's what you're doing. And so that lamp stand is up high. So this is what this is doing. It's the lamp stand is raising it up high, and there's 7 lamps positioned so the light gave light to the front. And so this is what they were supposed to do, light in the front. And then they have wicks and trimmers all made of gold. This is all solid gold, this one. We don't know what it'll look like. There's no dimensions in Exodus to tell us what it'll look like. So I made it like an Egyptian style, but all the other ones are kind of round. Here's one that's more like the Egyptian style here. These are all kind of round. So I don't know exactly what it'll look like, for example. So here we have the gold altar, also made of gold, wood overlaid with gold. Here is an incense burner from Egypt. So when it talks about the incense burners, they burned incense. This is what they did. I think sometimes in Uncle Arthur's Bible stories, we see something like they're swinging something, like it's like a Roman Catholic Church kind of censer. But that's actually the ancient Egyptian ones were like this. You'd hold it out, and then the little bowl would sit on the hand here, and you'd hold it like that. That's how you did your censer with your burning incense. You put it inside here, and that's how you would do it. And so you see them using them up here. Here's a censer right there. Here's a priest, a different kind of priest there. All right. Inside of the most holy place, whatever the veil was, whether it was a curtain or a canopy, was the Ark of the Covenant. I drew an Ark of the Covenant using Egyptian kind of style where the wings kind of overstretch each other. But the wings, you see the wings are kind of up and down quite a lot. And everything is carried on poles in ancient Egypt. You see them here carried on poles. This is from I think this is probably from the temple of Karnak where I work. But you see it all over the place. It could be from anywhere. This is the god Amun. He's being carried on a bark. And on that bark is his boat with his 2 winged creatures. And they're being carried by the priests, so they were not allowed to touch it, same as in the Bible. I showed the dimensions, the description of the Ark of the Covenant to my professors at University College London, and they were shocked by it. They said, this looks like the Egyptian. Whoever wrote this must have been in Egypt. Had to have been in Egypt because it couldn't have been somebody outside of Egypt, because the bark of Amun, the bark of the gods, never left Egypt. It was paraded around outside from temple to temple, but it never ever left Egypt. So whoever wrote Exodus, he said, had to have actually been in Egypt. He wouldn't have, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to see this. In other words, he recognized the Egyptian connection right away, and you can see it as well. One difference is that over here you have the 2 goddesses. I think it's probably Nephthys and Isis, or probably those are the 2 that's there. It could be, there's 4 of them. Probably those are the 2. And they're looking at each other. Their faces are looking at each other. I don't know, can you see that? The faces are kind of looking at each other. But the difference was, on the ark, the cherubim, what were they supposed to be doing? Their heads are facing down. So this is what I see about this. I see God using something that they were familiar with. It's the bark of the god. They're carrying their God on something very familiar. So the Hebrews would have recognized what that was. But he changed things because on the top of the ark, the mercy seat, these winged angels, cherubim, had their heads not facing each other because they themselves were not gods. They had their heads facing down because they were not gods. They put their faces down. So God used something, but then he changed and adjusted something as well. And you see they're always carried on poles. Here's some more. Here's how they stored their bark of the god, and then the ark with the winged creatures sat inside this right here. It's not there now, but that's where it would have been. And you can see them kind of here. This one is stacked 2 on top of each other. All right. Carrying things on poles actually was quite common. You carry people on poles. Kings and queens were carried on poles. You see a chest here is carried on poles. And the winged creatures, these protectresses, was quite common in ancient Egyptian architecture and art styles. So there's our 5 furnishings, 2 made of bronze, 2 made of gold. 4 of them, say 1, 2, 3, 4 were wood overlaid with gold. The mercy seat was solid gold. The lampstand was solid gold, and the laver, whatever shape it was, also was solid bronze. So we're going to put these together inside, kind of pull this back, as we're kind of pulling back our layers. We have our linen, our fine linen, very expensive linen on the outside, our ram skins dyed red, the utilitarian layer there for strength, the goat's hair for strength as well inside that, and then the linen layer, the very expensive linen inside with embroidered linen. You see as you come inside, you see that. You peel back a little bit more, you see the walls themselves, peel that back, and you have basically the furnishings on the north side, the south side, and then on the west, in front of the veil, whether it's a curtain or a canopy. I've made it a canopy here, but it could also just be a curtain straight there as well. And inside that was the Ark of the Covenant. So just kind of think for a second as you walk inside this room. This is a very interesting room. I don't think I do this again. I'll come back up one more time. So you come inside this room. It's about 17 feet high. I think I had 15 as an era before. 17 feet high. You come inside this room, and you look up to this very vast ceiling and space. It's about 20 feet wide, 50-something, 51 feet long or so. You're looking up this big, big space, and in front of you is perhaps a 10 cubit, 15 feet high by 15 feet wide, kind of a space for the most holy place. And as you come inside, behind you is the screen, linen embroidery, indicating that you're in the presence of your king. Up above you is the linen, also same thing embroidered. In front of you is the linen embroidered. On either sides of you is the gold overlaid, the wood overlaid with gold. So that means that the light from the lampstand would have hit the gold wall opposite and reflected. So actually you're getting light back and forth this way as the smoke ascends in front. It's just kind of think what you imagine. But imagine the size of this. This is very short. This was the table. We don't know what this one. The table and the golden altar were only a couple feet tall. So you're inside this big, big space with very short furnishings. It gives you the kind of idea of a grand space. If you ever had a chance to go inside of a Roman Catholic cathedral, you go inside of it and you can't help but notice the grand space. That's on purpose. Getting a chance to study the art of worship and temple designs, Catholic churches do a very, very good job to the grandeur of God. I like your sanctuary here. The grandeur of God is seen by this big, big space. You feel like there's a God in here bigger than me. And that's what I think was communicated. But not just a big God, also a God who is very valuable. How many new technologies were used? We went through each of these technologies in the process of describing the sanctuary, materials, and the new technology was in 5 of them. Gold and silver always was there. Goat's hair was always there. Acacia wood was always there in Egypt. But the bronze was new technology. Dyeing thread, 3 different colors, and then the red color was brand new, which means purple was brand new. Fine linen, this is something being able to do long cloths of it was new. Ram skins dyed red because the red dye was new. That was also new. And then the Taha skins, making this leather, the fine premium leather, was also new, which meant that there was a sense of value, a sense of specialness to the sanctuary that I never appreciated until I did this. But one thing I also understood by this is that all 9 materials were available in Egypt. One thing I grew to understand is that all 9 materials were not always available in ancient Egypt. They were only all available at this time. In fact, 5 of them weren't available before this time period, and then some of them were not available later, which means whoever wrote Exodus had to have known New Kingdom period materials, what was actually available. So not only all 9 available in Egypt at the time of the Exodus, they only all were available at that time. And that speaks to the authenticity of the writing, the ancient writing of this book. Were all 9 materials available? Yes, they were, and only at this time. And the designs seem to generally follow Egyptian culture. I actually measured them out using statistical analysis. If anybody's interested in that kind of thing, I'm happy to share that with you, but it bores most of everybody I talk to, so I don't have it here. Okay. One thing else I learned is that it seems like this is an Egyptian military camp. It's rectangular like Egyptian camps. It has the central structure in the middle like Egyptian camps. It has some kind of a tabernacle for us. Here, I don't know what this is called for Ramses, which also had 2 rooms, including a canopy where he was inside. So it seems to use design elements by Egyptian military camps. So how is it constructed? It seems like an Egyptian context, and with the Israel's God King at the center, just like Egypt. So it made me wonder why. How is this possible? Doesn't Hebrews say something about this? And how should we maybe understand this? Hebrews 8:4-5 says, "For if he were on earth," that's Jesus, "he would not be a priest, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law, who serve the copy and shadow of the heavenly things. So in other words, what God showed Moses he showed him the pattern, right? What God showed to Moses was a copy and shadow of what was in heaven, as Moses was divinely instructed when he was about to make the tabernacle. For he said, God said, see that you make all things according to the pattern, you saw that text earlier, shown you on the mountain. So how do I understand this in this way. I understand this to be a copy and a shadow, meaning when you see the Ark of the Covenant with the two winged cherubim with their faces down over the mercy seat with God's Shekinah glory and presence in between, we're to understand that this is a representation of God's throne, the Ark of the Covenant, right? God's throne. If that's exactly what God's throne looks like, then that means God is squeezing in between, I don't want to be sacrilegious, two gold cherubim, right? Obviously, it's representing two actual cherubim, covering cherubs over an actual throne with God in between. So the Ark of the Covenant is just a symbol or representation of God's actual throne and God's actual being. So in other words, the sanctuary on earth, the tabernacle on earth with all the furnishings, was made to represent the heavenly sanctuary. That is a very real sanctuary in heaven, but not looking exactly like the wilderness sanctuary. God used something else. So how do we understand that? My wife asked me that question. We were sitting on a beach near Michigan Lake, Lake Michigan, and one Sabbath afternoon we were talking about things, and she, as she knows, whenever I'm studying something, that's all I talk about. And so we were talking about this, and she said, Scotty, why would God bring his people out of the culture of Egypt, take them out, and then have them build something in the culture of Egypt? Because think about it. Gold is the skin of the gods. In the tabernacle, where was gold? It was just the tabernacle. Gold was not outside. It was just in the dwelling of God. The Ark of the Covenant, all the furnishings were just gold. Why would God use gold if it's the skin of the gods in Egypt? Why would he choose to use gold for that? And the only thing I can come up with is God wants to communicate heavenly concepts in a language they can understand. Regardless of how long they were in Egypt, I think it was only 215 years, but even if it was all 430 years, however long they were in Egypt, every person at the Exodus, young to old, every person had been born in Egypt and grown up in Egypt. Ellen White says that when Joseph brought his family to Egypt, he purposely kept them separate from the Egyptian culture because he didn't want them to be corrupted by Egyptian culture. But by the time of the Exodus, they were painting blood on doorposts and lintels. They had become very much Egyptian. In fact, she says Moses feared because the people had lost almost all knowledge of who God was. So God had to communicate to them who he was in a language they could understand. That language was Egyptian language. And so I think he took them out to Mount Sinai, and he built at Mount Sinai, had them build a sacred space that he could dwell in the midst of them, and he used Egyptian cultural influence to communicate a heavenly concept. In the same way that when Daniel in chapter 7, looking at the pre-Advent judgment, looks into heaven and sees scrolls being opened, I don't think we're supposed to think that there are dead plants or dead animals in heaven. That's what scrolls are made out of, either dead plants, papyrus, or dead animals, leather. So if Daniel's seeing actual scrolls being opened in heaven, I think it's symbolizing something being opened in heaven, but not actual dead material, because I can't imagine dead material being in heaven. I also see Ezekiel seeing God's throne in Ezekiel 1 is very much like a Mesopotamian chariot throne with wheels and gears and everything. And then John in Revelation 4 sees God on a throne that is described as a very like almost Roman-style throne. I think God communicates in language we can understand. And he's willing to condescend to what our understandings are in order to communicate heavenly concepts. I saw in the sanctuary God using one-for-one, embroidery, reserved for royalty. He chose to use that to communicate that he was their king. He chose to use gold, the same kind of material used the skin of the gods. But then he changed things like the position of the cherubim. He put their heads down, took something they knew, and then adjusted it. And then he introduced new things. That lampstand, I couldn't find anything like that in ancient Egypt. So it's a brand new. So there's some new concepts he's introducing. But in this way, the Hebrews can recognize immediately linen is pure. Blue is the color of the gods. Red is the color of danger. Don't go in; it's dangerous to walk in the presence of God. You're not supposed to be there. And then the purple, he's our king. They recognize these things. They understand those colors, what they mean. They understand the concept that everything's there because of the design element. And then I said, God is communicating to them, I think, in a way they can understand. And then we get to Balaam. Balaam in Numbers 23:21 is trying to curse Israel for all he's worth, and all he can do is bless them because God is filling him. In the middle of one of these oracles, as he's looking over the camp of he's looking down at the camp of Israel, and they're laid out as the camp of Israel, so it's got to have the sanctuary in the middle, and the armies all camped around it. And he's looking at that, and he says, he has not observed, that God has not observed iniquity in Jacob. That's a strange thing to say, considering all the iniquity that's been there, including all those Midianite women that could have come later. But nor has he seen wickedness in Israel. So he's putting them together. Yahweh, the Lord, is his God. His God is with him, and the shout of a king is among them. That's telling. Because how can you look down at the camp of Israel and know that their king is in the middle unless you recognize an Egyptian military camp, which if you're living in that part of the world, you've seen the Egyptian military come all back and forth all the time, and you know that in the middle of an Egyptian military camp is the structure, the tent of their god, King Pharaoh. And he looks down and sees a very similar design. And so I think God was also trying to communicate to the surrounding nations that his presence was not just God, but also the king of the Hebrews as well, the God king. So I think God was trying to communicate with the sanctuary, but I think he's also trying to communicate with us today, communicating with us what's happening in heaven, communicating us to help us understand now, because of Egyptian context, we kind of have more context for understanding why certain things. And I think God is also trying to help us understand how he wants to save us. The sanctuary is a very important thing because it's mentioned again. It's mentioned in 3 different prophecies in Daniel. It's mentioned again in Revelation. It's the thing that matters just before Jesus comes back. We have all the kingdom sequence, and then we have the pre-Advent judgment, which is happening in the sanctuary. And it's said over and over again. We see that over and over again, where God is trying to determine, not because God doesn't know, but so the whole universe understands that he himself has made the correct choices, and they judge every person. And so that's why we see in Revelation 14 that God's people at the end of time are to call people to understand that the judgment is happening right now in the heavenly sanctuary. And because now we have some context, he can communicate with us things that are happening right now that we can't also see. But it's for our own benefit, because when that ends in heaven, Jesus returns and we get to go to heaven with him, and I can't wait for that day. All right, well, we got all the way to Mount Sinai. Talk a little bit about Mount Sinai again tomorrow, and then on Sabbath morning, and then in the afternoon we're going to do some things about the Passover. But tomorrow we're going to also talk about Jericho and where was Jericho and what happened at Jericho. So I'll see you tomorrow at 6:30. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. There we go.
Is it on? Okay. So I just have a quick question about the height of the tabernacle being 17 feet tall. Do you think perhaps it was that height because the people back then were taller?
So we have skeletons of people back then, and they weren't that much. They were the same size as us, or a little smaller, actually.
Is there a reason it was 17 and not 18 or 16?
So it was 10 cubits. So they did by cubits, right? So it was cubits from the fingers to the elbow. And so the Egyptians actually standardized the cubit. So we actually have 4 cubit rods, the royal cubit in ancient Egypt. And so we're able to, if we use the royal cubit, because it's a royal domestic space, so it seems like a royal cubit would be the cubit we use, it works out to about 17 feet. So they weren't worried about our measurements today. It was measurements in ancient time. I think 10, God had a reason for 10. I'm not sure why 10, but that's what he decided to do. I think ultimately it was supposed to be twice as tall as the courtyard perimeter barrier so that people on the outside could see it, the top of it. I think that's ultimately why it was there. Good question. Another one over here?
The blood was frequently sprinkled on that curtain
The veil,
that
yes.
separated the
Yes.
holy from the most holy. It would have been a mess.
Yes.
And on the Day of Atonement, when the sanctuary was cleansed, do you think God supernaturally cleaned that curtain?
Yeah, I've thought about the same thing. I don't have any answer for that. I don't know. Yeah, I've thought the same thing. Anybody knows anything? Anybody's in the medical field, you know, or even if you cut yourself, you know what blood does and how it stains. The last thing you want is blood on a white shirt, and this is a white linen, right? So for some reason, I don't know if it was because of the Bible story books I grew up with, I always envisioned as I was growing up, the veil was a red or a blue or a purple color, but not white linen. But now that I know it's white linen and the embroidery is that, the blood's going to stain that badly, and I don't know how they clean that. Maybe if it was a canopy, they just turned it every once in a while and put it out in the sun, let God bleach it. I don't know how they did it. It's possible God could have cleansed it. I don't know. It's a very good question. That's one of those questions. I have that kind of question. I have a question. What do they do with all the ash from the burnt altar? Obviously, they did something with it. In ancient Egypt, they buried it actually in the courtyard itself because it was holy ash and holy space, and so they dug a hole and buried it there. So it's possible they did something like that as well. But how they wash all the priests' clothes, because all the priests' clothes are also linen, and they're killing the lambs. I'm a vegetarian. It's hard for me to imagine any of this, so I can't. I'm glad I live in the area I live. Maybe if I lived in the time of Daniel Boone, maybe I would have been a little more sturdy soul, but I'm not that. You have one over here. Yes, question. So the people at home can hear you.
I'm pretty sure that God cleansed it because God could take the vilest
Yeah.
of sinners' sins, which are scarlet, and make them white as snow. So
It almost has to be that, because I don't know any other way they certainly couldn't have cleansed it with anything that they had at the time. I know how Egyptians did their laundry and washed things, and they could not have gotten blood out. So it had to have been God. There's no other way. Yeah, that's a good question. Anybody else? Got one for here? You have another one here?
I'm kind of an analyzer, so I'm just trying to figure out how the veil really was, because I
Yeah.
always imagined it being...
That's a curtain. Yeah.
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 Then I was thinking, now you're talking about it being like this,
A canopy. Yeah.
a canopy. But the problem is doesn't it have several layers? It has the linen.
That's the tabernacle itself.
Okay.
So the veil is inside of that. It's a space inside.
So when you're doing the offering and the smoke is going up,
Yes.
where is the smoke going?
For the altar of incense, the
Yes.
smoke. Yeah, it's going to go up over top of the veil, and it'll be on top of the veil. It won't actually go. So it actually kind of covers and permeates the veil itself. That'd be the idea of it. And I'm not sure I'm sold on that idea. I've always thought of it as a curtain. I have a hard time not thinking of it as a curtain, and the smoke going over and being around the altar of the Ark of the Covenant itself. I'm not sure, but yeah. So the idea of it being a canopy is that it goes up over and kind of fills the space. The advantage to the canopy idea is that it actually explains why the Hebrew word is under for the Ark of the Covenant is under the veil while it's in the tabernacle, and there's no way to understand that as a curtain. It also defines now a space called the most holy space, and it's exactly the way the ancient Egyptians did their sacred space. The most holy space is by a canopy. So it matches all those criteria, but the question I have, the same question you have, is the smoke of the altar of incense, because I always thought it was supposed to go over the curtain and down around the Ark of the Covenant, and I'm not sure that there's any text that actually says that, but that's what I've always imagined it. So I need to go back and look at that and see.
The other question I have is, there's a lot of symbolism that's involved in the sanctuary.
Yes.
And so, we went through a course on the sanctuary in Oregon. And one of the things with the laver symbolizes washing of sins.
Yes, yes.
So when you give your talk, are you going to at some point, not when you're here now, but
Yeah.
at some point in your presentations, do you go through the symbolisms that's involved in the sanctuary? Because I think
Yeah.
that would be very
So
interesting.
I have an hour and a half presentation on this, and I do that there. But since we only have an hour together, I just do the archaeology part of it. But yeah, it just adds more time to it. But yes, I do. That's right. Because it's important. Because the priests actually, so that the Jewish priests, they actually would wash their feet and hands all together. So they'd stand one on each side, and even though we always picture it as a circle for some reason. But they would stand on one on each side, and they would wash their feet at the same time and their hands at the same time, all together. And they had some kind of symbolism for how they did things. The scholar in the Adventist world who's the best on this is Roy Gain. He teaches in this seminary, and he specializes in cult, the act and practice of worship. It's called cult. It sounds like a bad word, but it just means the practice of worship. And he specializes in that, and he goes deep into that. Richard Davidson is another one who does a whole lot with this, and they do some really, really good work. But we could be here for hours if they were talking about that. Yeah, it's good stuff. Yes,
It might be that God was reminding him, or that he was up on the mountain and covered himself.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that actually tomorrow, and probably tomorrow. We'll talk about that a little bit more. I went over here. Question over here. Oh, two over here.
Ladies first.
You mentioned that covering that has a word that nobody can translate.
Tahas, yeah,
Yeah,
Tahas, yeah.
that word. And you mentioned what some of the other translations mention. I was just going to say the NIV calls it another durable leather.
Yeah. They just
yeah.
avoid it altogether. Yeah,
Yeah, makes sense.
That NIV probably has the closest to probably what I think it actually what it turns out to be. That's right. Yeah. It's always been a search for a source animal, but the Hebrew word tahas has just been impossible to find, and it works really, really well as an Egyptian loan word, because it actually is the same word and actually is related to how they process leather. So it makes a lot of sense. So I think Benjamin Noonan is actually right on that. I think it makes sense to me. Yeah.
Is there a place other than this that Moses is communing with God, talking to it? He says, hey, how dare you talk like, this to Moses, because he sees me face to face.
Yeah.
Is there another place where he's communicating, or is Moses going into the sanctuary on a regular basis?
Yeah, so before the sanctuary is made, Moses' own tent is called the tabernacle of meeting, the tent of meeting. His own tent is. When they make the sanctuary, then you'll see that phrase is used for the tabernacle itself. And so it seems like until it's made, God's meeting with Moses in his own tent. And then he goes into the other and meets them there, or up on the mountain sometimes, of course, as well. Yeah, that's a great question. All right. I think in my book, you might find God communicating with him in different places. I just try to figure out where he's talking to him in Egypt. So anyway, that's another thing. Thank you so very much. I look forward to talking to you tomorrow night, where we talk about the Golden Calf a little bit, Mount Sinai, and the Battle of Jericho. Good night.
So tomorrow night, 6:30, you got to be here. Anyway, let's go ahead and pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you again for this opportunity to see your word and see all the pictures that are being drawn by Dr. Baker. Lord, continue to lead in our lives as we seek to draw closer to you and understand more of your truths. In Jesus' name, amen.